In today's video, we're going to discuss who can receive the sacrament of holy orders, and also how could somebody go about discerning whether they have a vocation to ordination to the priesthood. Well, to begin with, the Church is very clear that only a baptized man can validly receive ordination to the priesthood, in fact holy orders in general. It is a sacrament. So therefore we're not talking about the Church having a ban on anybody else being ordained. It's a fundamental recognition of the nature of the sacrament of orders in its entirety. And because holy orders is a sacrament, sacraments are outward signs of God's grace that were instituted by Christ. The Church has no authority to change those signs. If we, without authority from Christ, decide that we're going to change the nature of a sacrament, by altering the sign of the sacrament, we fundamentally remove the content of the sacrament itself. So apart from that then, who can be ordained a priest? Well, if somebody has a vocation, they literally have to be called by God. They can't decide to be a priest for themselves. That's going to end up in disaster. So there must be a journey of discernment, of learning whether God is actually calling them. And the Church plays a fundamental part in that. It's like being in any relationship, deciding that we are in a relationship with somebody else and that other person doesn't agree. So if the Church says that somebody has a vocation and that person along with the Church decides that that's the case, then yes, they do have a vocation. The priesthood presents significant challenges which requires a well-balanced, well-adjusted individual. But nevertheless, through that formation process, there will be plenty of opportunity to help that person to grow into that identity. If you think that you might be called to be a priest, don't let the little concerns that you might have about your own capabilities get in the way of that, because grace and experience will help you grow and adjust to those things if you are truly being called. Don't let that put you off offering yourself or considering the idea of priesthood. Don't expect yourself to need to have everything sorted in order to do that. Regardless of personality type, however, what the Church really needs is priests and those who are offering themselves to study for the priesthood to have a degree of maturity, a degree of peace with themselves and some self-knowledge. But one of the most important things to understand is that there must be something to work with to begin with. The priesthood offers an extremely busy lifestyle. You have meetings, sacramental preparation, schools, hospitals, prisons. You have all sorts of different diocesan responsibilities potentially, as well as looking after the parish. There is no such thing as the perfect priest. There is no such thing as the perfect seminarian. All of us come to formation with some kind of background, with some kind of baggage.
Speak to a priest that you trust and explore it. Don't try and work it out for yourself, because the key to discernment is that we never do it alone. We do it as a church. Speak to somebody within your own faith community, within your own parish, because sometimes they see something in us that we don't see in ourselves. And it's important to listen to those as well. And don't be afraid. I'll reiterate it again. Do not be afraid, because when we're open, when we're honest, and when we are prayerful, then the Lord's purposes will always be worked out. It's happened for me, and it will continue to happen for me as long as I pray and I remain open and I trust in Him. I've got no doubt about that.
So, as we hear from the sage words of Father Michael, never try to discern your vocation just by yourself. You do need help. But don't get anxious, don't worry, don't be afraid. It'll take time, and that's right. It's Really, when the time is right, the Lord calls us in very subtle, very small ways. He has little signs throughout our lives, little wake-up calls which help us to see things a little bit more clearly perhaps. Everyone is slightly different. But the fundamental building block of discerning any vocation is prayer. Without a prayer life, we can't understand or hear what God is trying to tell us, what He wants for us. And what God wants for us is always more interesting and better than we can ever imagine for ourselves. To move forward with a vocation requires courage. It requires the willingness just to make that first step towards discernment, to have the courage to either knock on the door of the presbytery or pick up the phone or write that email. We've all been in that situation. But if you don't make that first step, you will never know what God has in store for you.